on what was then Chatikara Road, which at that time, of course, was really just a dusty road through a largely uninhabited, undeveloped region of Vrindavan, with woods and fields on both sides. And Prabhupada that morning was, again, very much pleased. He'd worked so hard to establish the temple and install the deities, and now it had come off. And Prabhupada recalled how he pushed the devotees. He said, I was practically whipping them. Then he began telling how Krishna was flattering Balaram. That, my dear brother, all of these trees are bending down to offer you their obeisances. And these bees, they're all great sages who are coming to you for your association. In that way he began describing that pastime. And then he said how Gaur Nitai and Krishna Balaram are non-different. There's no difference between Krishna and Balaram and Gaur Nitai. He said, so if you ever have any difficulty, you can go before Gaur Nitai or Krishna Balaram and say, sir, this is the problem, and they will do the needful. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama.
It was just a wonderful victory for Prabhupada at the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple. A great triumph over many obstacles. In all of the temples in India, the principal temples that Prabhupada opened, Mayapur, Vrindavan, and Bombay, he struggled. In Mayapur, he struggled with his own godbrothers. And in Bombay, of course, he struggled with the tenants, the municipality, and in Vrindavan, he struggled with the Goswamis, and so all of them were a great victory. But I think Vrindavan was the greatest victory, and it was the homeland of Prabhupada, as he said, you know, my place of worship is Mayapur, my office is Bombay, and my home is Vrindavan. So it was a great triumph, and we all felt it. And from there, he built a bridge across the whole ocean to the whole rest of the world, that people could easily walk over that and enter into Vrindavan. He gave life to the whole of Vrindavan, actually. Enthusiasm for Krishna Bhakti. Even those who had opposed him in some way, recognizing, yes, you're a hometown boy, and you've made us famous all over the world, and you've brought Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission everywhere, and it was like formally really recognized by the town of Vrindavan. I remember at the time there were 6 Brahmin boys that were initiated from Brahmin families in the Braj. It was a big thing for a Brahmin boy to be initiated by Prabhupada and be in a movement where they would eat chapatis cooked by persons born in the West and so forth. It was a huge triumph for Vaishnavism over religion, you know, experiential, spiritual life over religion, Vaishnavism over Brahmanism. One of the causes that Prabhupada championed his whole life.
We were on the list for a second initiation in Vrindavan. So that was very exciting, because the first initiation that we had in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada wasn't able to be there, and we were initiated by his older disciples on his behalf at the time. But this time we were getting personally second initiation from Srila Prabhupada, so that was very exciting. We had the ceremony, and then we lined up outside his quarters and were to go in one by one to get the Gayatri Mantra. I didn't have a lot of money at the time, so I didn't really have any money to offer. So I went and got a big papaya. I thought, well, I'll offer him a fruit that he can have for breakfast or something. And I remember going in, I offered my obeisances, and I was just extremely nervous. Didn't know what I was supposed to say or anything. I just said, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And then he was sitting on the other side of his desk with his knee propped up. It was very warm, already in April, and he had on his sannyasi top, and he patted the floor beside him, sort of like saying, come on over here, you know, like calling his little dog. So I went scampering over and was sitting right next to him, and I remember being really nervous, but I wanted to be sure that I pronounced the Sanskrit nicely. Maybe I was even a little proud because Jayadwaita once had told me that my pronunciation was very nice in Sanskrit, probably from my German background. So he would point to one word after the other, and I would repeat, and I was trying to do it really nice. You know, I have to like impress my teacher. I felt so foolish and arrogant and foolish all at the same time. Then he says, "Do you know how to count?" And I said, "Yes, I've been watching the devotees for the past years doing their Gayatri." And I thought, gee, I should really have an intelligent question to ask, but of course I couldn't think of anything. I was just sort of dumbfounded. But I just remember feeling so much kindness and love, just so simple and practical, and I just paid my obeisances and left.
This is early morning, after the morning program. I was very amazed to get initiated on that day, and Prabhupada actually turned to Prabhupada and said, "This boy actually is too young to be initiated." I was only 9, and he didn't say anything. So Prabhupada looked at me and says, "Never mind." And then he asked for the principles, and I wanted to tell Prabhupada the regular principles in English. I was studying them during the initiation ceremony. So I told him 2 of the principles in English, and the other 2 I got stuck. And my teacher, Prabhu, he was behind Prabhupada. He was trying to encourage me. He said, "Don't worry, tell him in Bengali, the other 2. This is me. If you look carefully, I didn't have a Sikha because the barber in Mayapur, a couple of days before I arrived in Vrindavan, he by mistake cut all the hair off. I didn't have any Sikha, and all the devotees have Sikha, and they were making fun of me, and I look at it, Mayavadi. And Bhavananda fired the barber because he forgot to save me a Sikha. So anyway, Prabhupada didn't mind. He didn't say anything. And Prabhupada was quite pleased at that time. He saw in my face that I was trying to tell him the regular principles in English to please him. And he smiled and then he gave me the beads.
The installation of the deities was in Ram Nomi. And then the initiation ceremony took place on Balaram's Ras Purnima, April 21st, which was 5 or 6 days later. After the Hyderabad Pandal, we were headed from Hyderabad to the opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. And a whole bogie was reserved for the devotees, so it was all just devotees in the train. And there was one Indian sadhu sitting on his suitcase by the bathroom. And he didn't really mix with any of the other devotees. Mostly they were just Western devotees, a few Indian devotees like Haridas. And I was really wondering whether he was part of our group or not. He was very quiet and very patiently sat on his suitcase by the bathroom the whole way to Vrindavan. And then during the festival, although there was a moratorium on sannyas, the devotees had gone to Srila Prabhupada and asked if Tripurari could take sannyas. And Prabhupada said yes. And they said when? And he said, well, he can take now. So along with Tripurari, one other devotee took sannyas, and his name was Gaur Govinda. And then when he was there, I saw that this is the same devotee that was sitting very quietly by the bathroom, coming from Hyderabad to Vrindavan.
I was serving at the Montreal Temple, Canada. And there was a lot of devotees going to India, and before we left, I went back home to Los Angeles where my parents lived to give them a visit. And as I was leaving there, my mother asked me, out of the blue, she said, "Is there something I can give to you to take to your spiritual master?" And I was really taken aback by that question, and I went, oh, that's so nice. And I said, I don't know. What would you like to give him? And she said, I could make him some guava jam, because we had fruit trees at the property. So I told her that would be really nice. And so she made the guava jam, and she wrote on there for Srila Prabhupada. And when I was in Vrindavan, I went up to Srila Prabhupada's quarters and handed it through to one of his servants. And that was that. And then I found out for 2 days the Prabhupada's servant was looking for me. He had remembered what I looked like, but he didn't know my name. Finally, he found me, and he said that Srila Prabhupada really loved the jam, and he wanted my mother's name and address because Srila Prabhupada wanted to write her a thank you letter. There it was. I mean, all these devotees, huge event, you know, the opening of the temple, the installation of the deities, and Srila Prabhupada was so concerned to write a thank you letter. So my parents received a letter from Srila Prabhupada, and he was thanking my mom so nicely for this guava jam. And he told her that it was his favorite jam and that his mother used to make guava jam for him. And then he went on to say that, do not worry about your daughter. I am taking care of her. She is nicely engaged in the Lord's service. It was just a really sweet letter. It's just so amazing that Srila Prabhupada took that time to recognize just that little gift from my mother in amongst so much activity going on and so many devotees.
Well, here Prabhupada's giving Bhagavad Gita class. He actually wanted Bhagavad Gita class to be held in the courtyard. And there was one Indian joined, his name was Prem Yogi, and he told him that he should give class in Hindi every evening. Then there was also an Indian couple, Pranav and his wife, Vanamali, and he told him that he should also give Hindi class and his wife should sing bhajans. But then Pranav said, actually my wife is more intelligent than me, better that she gives the class. She speaks from Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada said, that's all right, if she can do that, she can give the class. Now these people here, these are students from Nepal, and Prabhupada wanted them to chant the Purusha Shukta every day. And this is the Hindi teacher. Prabhupada wanted us to learn Hindi. One morning I tried to demonstrate my Hindi. So I said, Prabhupada, I'm learning from this teacher. And he said, so what have you learned? I said, Ek balak jata hai, which means one boy is walking. Then Prabhupada said, you know how to say in Hindi, 2 boys are walking? I said, no. And then he laughed. He said, you'll never learn Hindi. So I took that as an instruction.
This tree was a place of pilgrimage for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Long before the Krishna Balaram Mandir was constructed in Vrindavan, in the early 1970s, there were purported to be very few tamal trees in Vrindavan, one at Rasatali and one at the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami and Radha Damodar. So when Srila Prabhupada noted that the land had a tamal tree on it, he was very, very pleased. There's an interesting pastime about this tree. Long before Srila Prabhupada sat under this tree, as we're witnessing in this footage, he envisioned himself sitting under this tree and looking at the deities of Krishna Balaram. He said, we'll have kirtan under this tree. And he said this tree should be worshipped. And the soil under the tree, a teaspoon of it should be taken and mixed with sand and water from the Yamuna River. And then with a coconut husk, you should clean the arti paraphernalia in our temple with this holy substance. This is a very sacred place for us. And let us pray that not only now, but in the future, Srila Prabhupada's wish will be fulfilled, and Gaudiya Vaishnavas will be able to worship this sacred tree in this sacred location for many, many more years to come.
Jaya Jaya Jeno Matsagan
the next step, the next key component was the establishing of the Goshala. Krishna Balaram now needs to drink milk. Just like they did 5,000 years ago when they were herding Nanda Maharaj's 100,000 cows. So Prabhupada called me into his room and he says, I'd like you to establish a Goshala. Krishna Balaram need milk, and my disciples need to maintain health and vitality. Because in those days in Vrindavan, basically the milk that we were drinking was either watered down buffalo milk or very watered down, God knows what, milk. So that was important. So what do? Prabhupada has told me to start a Goshala. I didn't have any money. I didn't really know how to begin. So I had a Seiko watch on my wrist. And I thought, right, I'll sell my Seiko watch. And then Bagaji, one older Indian gentleman that Prabhupada regarded as his right-hand man in India. And Bagaji helped me incredibly over so many years in my service to Srila Prabhupada. So he took me to Govardhan market where there would be a monthly cow auction. And from the proceeds of selling my Seiko watch, I think we got about 800 or 900 rupees in those days for it, I was able to purchase 2 cows. And that's how the Goshala started. And the Goshala started simultaneously with the construction of the Gurukul, the boys' Gurukul ashram, which also Prabhupada asked me to oversee the construction of that building.
After everyone had darshan, when the deities opened in the morning for Mangalarti, then they went to their sort of respective altar, like the women had Radha and Krishna, and the men had Krishna Balaram and Gonitai. And when Mangalarti having darshan, and at some point I turned around and then there was Prabhupada with 2 or 3 other devotees with him, one secretary or something. But all I know is that it was amazing to turn around and Prabhupada standing. You know how there are some steps. So he could not see very much, I suppose, being down from those steps and having the woman standing, turning our back to him, not knowing he was here, obviously. But I found out from Upendra afterwards that he was there for almost 10 minutes. Somebody was going to come to tell us to move. But when they tried to do that, Prabhupada said to just leave it. I mean, here's Prabhupada, probably not seeing very much, and he just stood there with all our back to him. And had I not turned around and seen him, no one would have moved away. It touched me.
Prabhupada was invited to this convention of sadhus. So we all went. Of course, the whole thing was in Hindi. The first order of business, out of respect for Prabhupada, they voted Prabhupada to be the president of the convention. Of course, everyone had a chance to speak, but that also meant that the president would speak last. So Prabhupada had to sit there. The Mona people, who don't speak, they use chalkboards to write. And the Jains with their mouths covered. And then all the Mayavadis and the yogis and Paramahansas. And I mean, everyone, they were talking. And Prabhupada, I don't know how he sat through all of this stuff. And then finally, at the end, they asked Prabhupada to speak. And Prabhupada, he spoke in Hindi, but he was so animated, and he was quoting shlokas, and you could tell he was giving them the sauce. And from the shlokas, we could understand Bhagavatam kicks out cheating religion. They were all quiet. They couldn't say anything. Of course, in the end, then Prabhupada said, what is the use of these conventions? They talk about unity and peace, but they'll never achieve it. They all have their own idea. You know, unless they surrender to Krishna, how can there be any unity?
After he spoke, Prabhupada said, let's go. And right away he sat down and he said, so did you understand what I was saying? And we said, a little bit, Prabhupada. He said, yes. I told him, everyone's speaking so many things, he said, but not once did anyone mention Krishna as a speaker of Bhagavad Gita, as being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He says that all your activities here will be useless. You won't accomplish anything. So he was still going on in the car. Prabhupada was a defender of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he just told them all off. And then he got in the car and he left. And I remember on the way back, we headed back to Delhi, I guess, and there was a big typhoon. And it was pouring rain, and trees were blowing down in front of us and behind us. It was just like all hell broke loose, you know, after Prabhupada left this assembly.
Towards the end of the darshan, the Delhi temple, he sat next to his harmonium and played a few melodies of the Hare Krishna mantra and chanted. And then he pushed the harmonium away and he said, this is the way to please Krishna, to chant the Hare Krishna mantra in different melodies. During Srimad Bhagavatam class, in that lecture he was talking about hogs, dogs, camels and asses. And my parents came to that particular lecture. And my father's response after that was, he said, what kind of lecture was that? He was just talking about hogs, dogs, camels, and asses. And Prabhupada gave us just what we needed to hear. But we're not always willing to accept. But it was very interesting. He was talking about Grihamedi life and hogs, dogs, camels, and asses. No Radhe Radhe or intimate pastimes, anything like that. When you look back now, it's so much clearer, you know, how his preaching was medicinal on the level that we needed to hear these things, and we still need to hear these things. He's giving the right medicine, the right dose at the right time. Not like a quack who give you something that you like to take, but doesn't actually do the job.
And there are all the devotees. But you can see Prabhupada, after arriving 10 hours on the plane, 12 hours, sometimes 15-hour flight, he's always fresh and spry. Navayovana, Krishna's Navayovana. So Prabhupada was the servant of the ever-fresh Krishna, so he was always spry himself too. And Prabhupada's weighted down with the flowers. There was never too many flowers. Prabhupada would distribute the flowers. And there he is, from material calculation, an old man walking with the young, spry, enthusiastic devotees. This was a great scene. Prabhupada felt comfortable in the presence of all the young, enthusiastic devotees. He didn't feel out of place. Srila Prabhupada would only come to Australia once a year, which was quite good, considering the remoteness of the country. But Prabhupada came to Australia 6 different times. This is a good picture. On the right is the temple, and on the left is the Prabhupada house. Beautiful yellow and white. We painted the whole house. Up on the top it said Prabhupada house. There's a widow's walk on the top where they could look out into the ocean. Here's Prabhupada walking in. This old house was about 100 years old, a Victorian house, a historical house. It was the first house in the whole neighborhood that was built by a rich man. All the details about it you can get from Korma's book, The Great Transcendental Adventure by Korma Das, the cook. The whole house was redone, and We made it very elaborate, ebony wood, and the drapes in the walls, and the floors were all done over, and the chandelier, and Prabhupada walked in, he looked around, he says, all this is for me? And we said, yes, Prabhupada, this is Prabhupada's house, your house. So we were very happy. But before this time, we had always been operating out of small houses and storefronts, and the devotees collecting in the streets and enduring a lot of different hardships, distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. So moving into this new temple and inviting people was the crowning glory of all their efforts. And it was a time of great pride for the devotees to showcase their spiritual master in such a beautiful setting and such a relaxed atmosphere. And this marked a great historic time in Australia Yatra.
When Prabhupada came back and they took him up to his room, and so I went up there and brought this beautiful silver bowl with these peanuts and spiced rice bubbles in it. And I came in and put it down before Prabhupada and paid my obeisances. And then Prabhupada took out his Gayatri thread and started chanting his Gayatri. So all the other big Brahmins in the room brought out their Gayatri threads and sat there like this. And then after a very short time, Prabhupada finished chanting his Gayatri. Everyone else still had their, sacred thread hooked around their thumbs. So Prabhupada reached into this bowl of these spiced rice bubbles, picked up a little bit and handed it to the nearest Brahmin who still had his thumb hooked around this Gayatri thread. And what a dilemma. So all the devotees immediately stopped chanting their Gayatri, put their hands out and accepted what Prabhupada was offering them. I've later found out from Shruta Kirti's book, this was a fairly common occurrence, that Prabhupada chanted his Gayatri very quickly. So one by one the devotees got up and left the room, and I was still sitting there alone with Prabhupada. And he asked me what my service is. I said, Prabhupada, I do cooking and deity worship. He said, oh, that is very nice.
This is one of the things I think the devotees really appreciate, and I talk about it a lot, is, it's seeing how, or hearing how Prabhupada lived. That, we all need to see and know how Prabhupada practiced Krishna consciousness. And taking prasadam was, to me, was just such a wonderful activity, the way he did it. You can see he always took prasadam alone, 99% of the time. And if there was someone who was in the room and I would bring him prasadam, he would just very graciously, he would take off a piece of fruit or 2 or 3 for whoever was there, or a little sweet, and just give them a little something and say, okay, Hare Krishna, and send them on their way. And then he would sit there and he would just honor prasadam. He did it very calmly and peacefully, and never in a rushed way, never talking about different things, but he relished prasadam. It was such a nice thing to see. There's another thing we do, especially as Westerners, we can turn taking prasadam into meeting times and just socializing times with other devotees, just carelessly, talking about whatever, and really not get into the significance of honoring prasadam, mercy from Krishna. You could see with Prabhupada, he took it in that way. You could just feel, he was honoring Krishna in the form of his prasadam. So wherever he was, prasadam he was ready to have right around noontime. And as he traveled and the time changes, he would just immediately adapt. There was no adjustment periods for Prabhupada. Never talked about jet lag, having to recover, take a day off. Just went right in and immediately accepted his responsibilities that he had, given himself, giving class, greeting the deities, morning walk, meeting with the devotees, the management, giving advice.
The first time I met Srila Prabhupada,